All right, y'all. This is Jake,
And I'm Cam.
and we have issues. And today we have All-Star Superman, written by Grant Morrison. It's penciled by Frank Quitely and digitally inked and colored by Jaime Grant, and it's lettered by Phil Balsman.
Okay, great. Well, since this was your pick, Jake, how about you sort of lead in with what drew your attention to this particular book back when it came out, or just whenever you read it? So how about we start off there?
Well, I mean, this was how I actually got it. I never got it in individual issues. I just saw it on the comic rack. I had seen a little bit of Jim Lee's All-Star Batman and Robin. I didn't pick that up. I was just kind of reading it. I was like, okay, this is an interesting take. And then when I saw this actual volume in a comic store, probably in New Orleans, I said, okay, this looks different. I'll pick it up and see. And so I started reading it in the comic store, and I was starting to get blown away. And I said, I have to get this volume, right?
Yeah.
I mainly I got this because it harkens back to the Superman of the 1970s, like an era the era where I basically started to draw and read comics, my very early childhood. As a matter of fact, the very first comic that I remember having and my dad buying for me, which I still have, is an Action Comics issue with Superman carrying the large key to his Fortress of Solitude. And that actually plays in this volume. So once I kind of read that and I saw that, it just harkens back to my childhood. And for you, Cam, I think I got you interested in this. How did you get into it?
Yeah. So I mean, I hadn't heard of the story before you introduced it to me. I read the all-in-one trade back paper edition, and in terms of what little I knew about it beforehand, I did a little bit of research after you said that our next pick's going to be All-Star Superman, and I found out that so DC. So correct me if I'm wrong. DC ran or tried to sort of start a new series whereby they would sort of retcon some of their main characters, or their heroes. So there was, as you said, the All-Star Batman, which and again I've not read that, but if it's anything like this particular book, then it sort of takes elements from the character's backstory, but almost sort of reboots it in a way. But that's what I understood from this All-Star series. But I think there's only two, right? There's only All-Star Superman, and before that, All-Star Batman. Is that right?
That's all that I can actually remember. And when you actually go through all of the stories in All-Star Superman, you kind of realize that it is an arc. You're just like, it actually kind of goes full circle to what's been established. And I'm not even sure really if DC meant the All-Star books as an experiment in not necessarily retconning, but just kind of saying like, this is a self-contained story. So but anyway, I mean, just concentrating on All-Star Superman, because I haven't really read all of All-Star Batman. It really, to my mind, succeeds in putting everything that I knew of the Superman mythos all into one compact volume, but giving it kind of like this modern sensibility.
What let's talk about the writing then. So why don't you start off? What did you think of the story in general? And maybe we should let the listeners know that we read, although I've read the whole book and you've read it, so I'm sure more than once. We're only going to talk about episodes 1 to 6.
Well, for the writer like Grant Morrison, he's from Scotland, I believe, and he's done.
In fact, sorry to interrupt there, but all three
All three of them
creators
are
on
from
they're
Scotland. Yeah,
they're all Brits and they're all Scots, and that's the first thing that kind of surprised me, because I thought, I assume they're American, but no, they're actually British guys from Scotland. So,
yeah, and that's the really great part about it too. It's like that they had this all Scotsman team, that dreamed up this story of like the most all American superhero.
That's the first thing that kind of came to mind.
Yeah, and but the thing is, they kind of pick up, like Morrison picks up on the sensibility of Superman being this fantastic character that has such an optimistic, outlook to him. Like when you look at Superman, you're always looking at the kind of like the best. Superman as a character is kind of like the best of humanity, wrapped up into a superhero. It's like if Superman didn't have these human qualities, he'd just be like the most dangerous, like, anarchist dictator, right? But since he has these optimistic human qualities, he's not only more relatable, but you're just like, yeah, if I had the power to do that and change things and do things because I have this kind of like this really humanistic spirit, Superman is what I'd be. And they really, like Morrison kind of really catches that. And maybe just kind of picking on maybe I'll pick on some small details in the Superman character himself. If you kind of look through the book, it's always an instance of Superman in any second saving somebody's life. Superman is always saving somebody's life, whether it's the guy who's crossing while he's crossing the street in the first issue, I think, with Lois Lane, and him and his Clark Kent identity, and Clark's trying to tell Lois something really important, and Lois is kind of blowing him off, and he's crossing the street to her apartment, and then he bumps into some guy, right? And the guy's like, "You moron, you jerk, and your boyfriend's a jerk," and Lois is like, "He's not my boyfriend, and how dare you?" And as a matter of fact, you could see in the panels, and I love this, you could see that Superman sees that something's falling from the sky and is going to crush this guy. And if he doesn't bump into him, he wouldn't have been saved,
Yeah.
And little things like that are sprinkled throughout the issues, just like when, I mean, Luthor is supposed to be electrocuted, but like in his interview with Clark actually, Superman saves his life by tangling himself in the electrical cord, for, just seemingly by accident. Like Luthor's going like, you seem to have saved my life from electrocution. The irony of that is kind of the strangest thing. But anyway, going back to the writing, Morrison kind of catches those simple things, even small things like you will see that are caught from like the Superman movies. Again, some of the more optimistic versions of Superman, wherein Clark is also saving somebody's life, like without them knowing it. So little aspects like that are interspersed in the writing, that catch your attention, are really awesome. And Morrison is really good at kind of setting something up from the beginning and then having it pay off. And unfortunately, we can only see little bits of that in the first 6 issues.
Yeah.
When you examine the entire arc, you're just like, oh, he planned all that from the beginning. And it's really, I love it when stories do that. Stories do that.
Yeah, and getting into that, so the overarching story here that we looked at the 6 issues, 4 episodes, are basically, and this is a very general overview, and I'm going to use this splash page here as my reference point. And And I gotta say, I mean, man, look at the artwork here. We're going to talk about the art later on, but so basically, Superman has to foil one of Luthor's latest schemes to to basically kill him, and it relates to to Superman having to infiltrate a um, basically a mission to the sun, and save a bunch of astronauts from basically well diving right into the sun and being incinerated. But by doing so and by getting so close to the sun, he gets exposed to uh, basically lethal amounts of solar radiation, which is, the ultimate irony, because Superman, his source of power, the source of his superpowers are, the sun. It's from the sun, and this is the very source of his power that is also his ultimate undoing. And so when he gets overexposed to this solar radiation, he he basically develops cancer. And so the rest of the story, the entire arc, is basically this, following this narrative thread that he has limited time to live, and he's trying to tie up loose ends. So it's a really, really interesting hook, and one that I didn't expect. I knew it was sort of framed around Superman dying, but I didn't really know what he was dying from until I read it. So this was actually, and the setup is really quite interesting. So
just from the writing, just to kind of go, like, I love that each issue kind of delves. The first issue basically is the exposition, but it also lays the groundwork for what kind of Superman universe we're in. In which case, we know that this Superman is surrounded by his supporting cast from the 1970s, which includes like Catherine Grant and Steve Lombard. It doesn't have Morgan Edge. For those like who have read Superman, like Morgan Edge was a big 70s player.
Okay,
he has Perry White. Yeah.
You need to fill me in on that. So who's new here, or who's missing, if you like?
Oh, basically Morrison keeps it to the supporting characters that have always been essential to the Superman mythos, with a little sprinkling. Like I said, like Catherine Grant and Steve Lombard are the sprinkles that were added in the 1970s. But you have Lois Lane, you have Perry White, and you have Jimmy Olsen, right?
Yeah.
And essentially the second episode is about Lois Lane, right? And then one of the episodes concentrates on like Jimmy Olsen, and also a little bit of a cameo from Lucy Lane, which is Lois's sister. It even has like General Lane, Lois Lane's dad. The things that make Superman, and how, and then the modern sensibility of kind of looking at it through this lens where, what if Jimmy Olsen was writing also in the newspaper, and he was like this not this columnist that everybody kind of like envied or hated.
Am I wrong in referring to this Jimmy as a sort of a more updated, edgier version of the character?
Jimmy Olsen, back from his first incarnation all the way up through the 50s and 60s, was basically the ideation of what if your pal was, what if you were Superman's pal, and you had Superman kind of like at your beck and call with a signal watch. He also happens to be Superman's co-worker, and he doesn't know that. But through and the thing is, even just taking the Jimmy Olsen issue, there's sprinklings in the Jimmy Olsen issue of his past versions. Like, because Jimmy Olsen was one of the more popular titles for DC back in the 50s and 60s, mainly because it was such an experimental book wherein they put Jimmy Olsen through the ringer, that they like transformed him into all these different types of characters and his own different versions of kind of heroes, that we see that version of Jimmy Olsen for the 21st century, in which case, like, what if I was Superman's pal, but in the 21st century? What does he get to do? And, with Jimmy kind of going through and becoming like the top scientist of the world for a day and saying to himself, oh, I've also been cursed with bad luck until the next full moon. What can go wrong? It just turns out that, there's going to be some black kryptonite that's going to make my super buddy try to kill me. in which case you get another cameo of a famous Superman character just out of the blue, that has to stop Superman by the end of that issue. Those are each issue is a little jewel and a homage to an aspect of Superman. And that's why this series just really tugs at my heartstrings. It's such a nicely written homage to the Man of Steel.
Yeah, and I thought some of the stories I enjoyed more than others, but I especially liked the more character-focused introspections of like Clark's family. The last episode 6, that we looked at, just really having, it harkens back to sort of simpler times, and really gets down to maybe even the essence of who Superman is, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So he's very much a family guy at the end of it, right? I mean, ironically, he can't really have a family of his own, but he has all of these very grounded sensibilities, despite being, almost a god in many ways. But at the same time, there's a lot of humanity in him, and I think it's really interesting how Morrison weaves this story in a way that, if you're new to the character, even like myself, I mean, yes, I'm most aware of Superman through different levels of exposure, but never to the level, let's say, from comparing to yourself, where you have read many of the iterations of the comics. And I like how Morrison makes it so accessible. He makes the story really accessible, and it really boils down who Superman is. He is, in many ways, the antithesis of a superhuman, in that he is a very human, down-to-earth guy, really, but he's almost stuck in this godlike form. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition of how you have all this power, all this, responsibility, as you said. Like he feels like his own, his very existence is governed by the people he needs to save and the situations he needs to get involved in, which is usually everything. So he never stops, but at the same time, he never forgets that he is an outsider as well, which I thought was really interesting in terms of Morrison's look at his own integration into our society. And for somebody who's new to Superman, I thought it was handled really well, because it made me feel a lot closer to the character, which in past experiences from me reading Superman in various forms in sort of DC works like The Dark Knight Returns, for example, I didn't really get any of that from those stories. I know that wasn't the point of those particular stories, but here it's a very intimate look at who Superman is as a character. So for somebody who's new to the story, I would say, oh, this is a pretty good starting point in terms of you getting almost an overview of who this guy is, really. And I just want to point out, and this is something I want to hear your opinion on in terms of the writing, but it also kind of feeds into the art, is how Clark, as opposed to Superman, is handled in this. Even his physicality is changed, which I've never seen before. He looks like a different person. In this iteration of Superman, Clark is literally not just a different person, but physically looks different, and he's kind of hunched over. You can almost feel that. I mean, damn, he's really trying here, and he's pulling it off. Like I can empathize with the fact that it must take a huge amount of effort for him to be Clark.
Yeah. It's good that you picked up on that. Like, the characterization of Clark Kent as Superman is, and you kind of also mentioned The Dark Knight. So the essence of the Dark Knight is basically that Bruce Wayne can never hide the fact that he is actually Batman. Batman's just wearing Bruce's face as a mask. But the thing about All-Star Superman, as Superman himself as a character, is Superman is always Clark Kent. He is Clark Kent, like, because the Kents raised him in kind of like these Midwestern American spiritual values, which you kind of see in issue 6. So going back to how it was kind of, we're kind of going between like the writing and the art now, but seeing how he's drawn, like the difference between like how Clark is hunched over and kind of bumbling, and how Superman's kind of like really confident and of course like poised like a superhero, right? Is, I think they may have gotten cues from the actual original Superman movie. And also the original Superman TV series, in which case you could actually believe that George Reeves or Christopher Reeve could be like a different person. Like in the movies, Christopher Reeve made it a point to hunch over and kind of be really bumbling. He changed his voice. He kind of gave those cues that that in the art here in All-Star Superman are picked up upon. And the one of the key pages in the art that kind of shows that is when he's looking into the mirror in his fortress and kind of wondering, well, should I tell Lois that, I'm dying? And he puts on the glasses and is hunched over, right? Even in a Superman costume, he's putting on the Clark glasses and is hunched over in real life. But in the mirror, you don't see the glasses, and you see Superman kind of proudly standing up, still in the mirror. Frank Quitely's totally kind of captured that essence and kind of just put it right there in front of you, saying like, well, this is how Clark is, and that's how Superman is, and that's how we can see the total difference.
Yeah. And there's a particular panel that I want to show on page 25 where you've got Clark here. It's such a perfect rendition of him bumbling around the office at the
yeah.
It's a side of him that I think hasn't, in my opinion anyway, hasn't been done quite as well as it has here. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. You've been exposed to a lot more Superman than I have, but this feels like the kind of Clark Kent that I always imagined in my mind. This guy who's just an innocent, an innocent fool, really, in a lot of ways. But really, it's just a lot of fun. I mean, just seeing him, that duality is just a lot of fun here. And both Morrison and Quitely do such a good job of marrying the writing and the art to portray that.
Yes, and that's the thing, is they've done that because that's the quintessential portrayal of Clark and Superman. It's like for many years, people have said like, oh, Clark is this mild-mannered reporter. That's how he was always characterized, for the Daily Planet. And then Superman is his antithesis in a way, being this, adventurer, really bold and daring and courageous. But just as something that we'll probably look into later, you'll probably want to check out the Man of Steel by John Byrne, which characterizes Clark in a very different way. It was actually kind of half shocking when they after Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC kind of remade all their heroes, and John Byrne had first shot at remaking Superman, and his rendition of Clark Kent from Superman is quite different from this one and what everybody has always expected. That's a little teaser for whenever we do that one.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. So should we move into the art?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so maybe you could start off with your thoughts on the art.
I was familiar with Frank Whiteley from before, from the different work that he had done. He had done, I think, mainly like Transmetropolitan and The Authority. I had never really picked those up. That's some of his work from before, I think. But what really kind of made me a fan of Frank Whiteley was this book, was All-Star Superman. Just from the way that he was, just from how you described him differentiating just Superman and Clark Kent. Whiteley's art style lends itself to like superheroes. He draws like these big looming muscular men, right? In contrast, he also has like very delicate looking women. It really kind of, as I said, lends itself to a superhero comic, right? And also like him drawing all the different aspects of this universe, especially like Leo Quintum and his think tank, which then gets its start from like Project Cadmus. That's a little nod to the 80s DC Superman series. He proved himself through this comic to be able to draw just not only like the grandeur of the Superman universe, but like the little mini infinitesimal details like Clark's hunch and the way that Clark looks completely different from Superman. There's so many different things here for the art that I can kind of comment on. I think what is really nice for me to see is when Frank Whiteley's art is married with Jaime Grant's inks and also his colors. It kind of reminds me from the time that I was commenting on the art in The Dark Knight Returns, in which case, okay, these are the first like prestige format series that DC actually put out. And it's the experiment of using these types of marrying comic art with new ways of coloring. But when you see kind of like the maturization of that from The Dark Knight Returns over to All-Star Superman, you see all the different ways that the coloring has just matured into this. It just makes everything on the page pop. Even from the first issue when Superman is going in and saving the astronauts from plunging into the sun, each little detail like in those sequences, like from the sun, from the details of the ship to the details of the sun to like the details of like Superman's cells, really kind of pops. It's like it's in Technicolor. They're seeing a movie in Technicolor for the first time.
Yeah, I think that was what I was looking for when I was figuring out what I wanted to say about the art. It's very much a Technicolor explosion. Was this completely digital in terms of the coloring?
That's going to be my assumption, but everything now, as far as like comics is concerned, is done digitally, right? So when this book was published in the 2000s, it was already being done that way. Okay. So they were taking advantage of that type of coloring, and also the printing process had advanced from 1986 when The Dark Knight came out. So the mid 2000s essentially. So I'm assuming they would have done something in either Photoshop or Painter. This would have been painted in Photoshop or Painter. Being the prevalent things of that era. So yeah, you could see gradients, you could see different levels of the color palette. It's amazing. It's amazing. Like really just the marriage of the art and the coloring just makes this and the way that Superman is as a character, it is a Technicolor character. You can't help but think of Superman. Superman black and white doesn't work in my head. Batman black and white does. Superman in Technicolor in this rendition totally works.
It did, it really did work. And there's one particular panel that I absolutely love, with Lewis and Clark on the moon, and again, it sort of encapsulates all the things you described, all those Basically, I mean, even the characters, they're just so intricately presented here. They're so just so well articulated. I think. But
Hmm.
if I have one little criticism, and it's probably just me, I don't know, but the way Frank Quietly draws skin and is kind of a bit weird sometimes. Like everyone's like really like ridiculously wrinkly. So the same page.
Hmm.
Do you see Superman's hand there? At
Yeah.
first I thought, is that because he's dying and he's losing a lot of weight? But no, they've everyone is really veiny and sort of wrinkly, and I thought that was a bit odd to me.
It might also be kind of like this. I mean, it's probably Frank Quietly's style, but at the same time, there were a lot of artists that were emerging in the late '90s and the early 2000s that had that style as well. You should check out Jeff Darrow, who
Okay.
did the concept art for The Matrix, and he's done like hard boiled.
Oh yeah. He's like his stuff is like super detailed, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
architecturally
yeah,
super detailed, lots of line
yeah.
work.
Mm,
And it also really depends on the inker.
mm,
It'll be the inker who kind of controls that.
right.
Um, so um, I think the inker was also Jaime Grant. So
Yeah,
Jaime Grant, I think if he inked it, he needed to ink it because he was also coloring it. So he was inking it so that the colors would pop, right?
right, right.
So in many senses, you may want to check out like the Authority and some of the earlier work that Quietly's done, that he may have inked himself or different inkers have done. This may
Yeah.
be actually more of a cleaner work.
Mm,
If I'm kind of remembering some of that work as well.
yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, overall, the art was just brilliant. It really sucked me into the story. But the writing and the art together, well, what a perfect marriage for this particular story.
Yeah.
It just all comes together so well. Just
Hmm.
looking at Superman's face here, he just exhibits this look of calm, you know,
Hmm.
uh, which you don't normally see. At least I haven't seen in the character, other than before reading this book. In that
Hmm.
he looks like he has so much power, and yet this calm on his face. To me, I interpreted it as I have this limited amount of time now, and it's me looking back at what I've done and what I can still do, even in
Hmm.
these last moments. And that to me really made me uh, really fall for the character. I just thought, man, this guy's really cool. Like I like this guy, you
Yeah,
know. Whereas
Superman.
before I was like, ah, man, he's just Superman. You know,
Right.
he's just really powerful, and there's not much more to him. But man, this
Hmm.
story between Morrison and Quietly, and even the inking by Grant, just it all just talk about a trifecta of just excellence. It's just so good. It
Yeah,
just works
yeah.
so well, you know.
Yeah, yeah. They they must be eating something nice in Scotland to kind of
What
get that
haggis?
talent out there. Yeah, the haggis is
The
working.
haggis, yeah, the haggis. I've tried. I've actually tried haggis. It's pretty good. I quite like it. So.
Oh no, haggis is great. The first time I ever
Yeah.
had haggis was in Edinburgh from a Marks and Spencer.
What?
Um,
Oh
yeah,
man.
Marks and Spencer haggis, and it was
Well,
fantastic. It was fantastic.
yeah, I do like haggis. But yeah, I mean, whatever it is, all the elements just come together so well. So, closing
Mhm.
thoughts, Jake. What do you? How do you want to close us out on this one?
I just had this. I had just had this weird. I mean, and I've always been kind of formulating this. I've in my head, and it kind of came together slightly while as we were talking. It's like as an American, and kind of looking at this, and looking at this again, All Star Superman.
Mm,
So much of this is just so much of Superman is so American to me. Just think about it. Superman Superman as a character embodies this almost infinite amount of power. right? And you could see that in this story as well. And what's keeping that power in check is his humanity. You know, his belief that the values that he has is it's like his belief in doing good is kind of what grounds him. And I kind of look at America in general, you know, at this superpower that is America. And like, America's not the most ideal place. Sometimes I just kind of go like, you know, there's so much more that can be improved with America, but Superman himself kind of is the quintessential optimistic American character when I really think about it. It's like he has all of this influence, and yet, you know, for just, you know, just the character himself, he exercises so much restraint. I can't really, if you juxtapose it with what America is and how America is viewed by many different countries and many different peoples, you know, America can be the villain. But my point being is, like, if we still have people who kind of believe or are optimistic, you know, Americans themselves are also very optimistic. I mean, you kind of, having grown up in America and having that sense of hard work and kind of dedication and belief in good, that is still something that America has. And it kind of makes me kind of think, man, there is so much stuff that America's done that's not good, but is the only thing that's keeping America like totally running rampant just still that sense of good that should still be in America? I don't know. That it's really a strange thing for me to kind of discuss, but it makes me think about that.
Well, I mean, the fact that it makes you think about it in from that angle is a testament to how good the book is in itself. And for me, I want to sort of maybe close up by referencing the optimism that you mentioned, and there's bucket loads of it in this. I mean, despite the fact that it can be quite somber in places, and it is really ultimately following the final hours of the Man of Steel, but at the same time, it really does push home the idea of who Superman is, and somebody who has an unwavering level of humility towards towards himself and where he came from, and the people that he has pledged his life to protect, and and that would be everybody. And I think this story really encapsulated the idea, to me, ironically, that Superman, he's a human. He's a very human character, and that to me is what sold the story. That even at the end, he never compromised. He never forgot what his responsibility was, and despite everything that he'd been through and everything that he came to be known for, it didn't take away the fact that at the end of the day, he was just a guy who wanted to help people, and that is what I take from it. And it's a really great overview of the character, and I couldn't really give it more praise than that. So I would definitely read it if you haven't. So yeah, those are my closing thoughts. So
yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you liked it, Cam. I mean, I'm really glad that because at first you were when we were talking about it, you were just like, oh, what's this? I wonder what this is.
Yeah, yeah. Props to this team. They put together a really great book.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. The team that made this book is awesome, and I don't know if they've done anything else together. I would love to check that out too.
Worth checking out, definitely. Well, all right. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and we will see you in the next one. So thanks and take care.
Yeah. See you guys later.